Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Traditionally Speaking. Well, have we got a treat in store this week? Because we're going back to the decade of egg chairs and lava lamps, the 1960s. What
Well,
better?
gee, Tom, what do you remember about the 1960s?
Well, precious little as it happens, Joe, because I wasn't born until the late 70s, so it's going to be an education for me.
So guess what, folks? You're going to be hearing a lot from me on this one. Because I was born way ahead of that. So
But it was the swinging 60s. It was a time of modernism. It was the time of everybody looking ahead to progressive ideals and lots of exciting developments in pop culture. Some of which we're going to be discussing as we go. But what kicks off the 1960s? Well, a couple of quite iconic toys actually. In the USA, the top-selling toy was a Chatty Cathy doll, whereas over here it was the Space Hopper.
yeah, and I'll tell you, Chatty Cathy was everywhere to be had. My sister had one, and she wound up being very angry with me because I would steal it from her and hide it, and then I wrote on it and oh God, she did not like me at all. But boy, I'll tell you, I think my parents wound up having to get her another one because I think I broke the string by accident. But Chatty Cathy was that. She was chatty.
It's interesting you mentioned the string because she did have a pull string, didn't she? That
Oh,
made her.
she certainly did. Yeah. A long one. Yeah. You had to pull it out all the way. And, it was fun because when you pulled it out, you let it go in and then you pull it out again. And she changed what she was saying.
Okay.
So it's like I could get her to change and say 10 different things with one pull. So, which also made my sister nuts. And you guys, I swear to God, when you wrote this and you said space hoppers, I'm going, what in God's name is a space hopper? And I went, oh, for Pete's sake, it was the big round ball with those handles that you used to jump around that we called hippity hops or hoppity hops or things like that. I never had heard of space hoppers.
Yeah, they were beloved by a whole generation of British kids, and as you say, they were big, bouncy toys where you held onto their antennas for dear life and you tried to hop along with them. And some people could get into the rhythm of it better than others. I have to say, I didn't always have the knack myself, but it was always good fun giving it a try.
Well, I'll tell you, there are a lot of banged up heads from those things, and kids getting thrown off or falling off or rolling backwards or that kind of thing. That part I remember. It was pretty dangerous to get on those things if you didn't know what you were doing, or if you started to get too rambunctious on it, it'd throw you off just like a bucking bronco. So. And then we move right into the 1961, and Ken finally made it to the top of the charts. I mean, the Ken doll, Barbie's boyfriend, finally made it as the #1 toy. Took a while.
It certainly did, because I mean, Barbie had been, the most successful toy in the US in the late 50s. So interesting, it took Ken that little bit longer to break into the charts like that. But they're one of the most famous partnerships in the world of toys. So it was good to see him making his appearance.
And in your country, I mean, we were doing slot cars and having races, and there were entire stores that had set up tracks where you could take your slot car and race it. But we never had a particular brand like Scale Electric, like you had. Yeah. And so it doesn't surprise me that was the top seller for that, because I had slot cars. Man, I was having a blast with them.
Scale Electrics was huge over here. It was absolutely massive, and obviously quite pricey to start with. I mean, it would take a while for it to really penetrate the market. But kids loved them. I mean, they loved the fact that you could rearrange the track, you could race your friends with them. I mean, they continued to be popular for decades after that.
And over here, the slot cars, you were able to take apart and change parts out and to make them faster or better around the track or that kind of thing. But again, we never had a brand that had so many different models and speeds and that. I mean, you guys were way ahead of us on that.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those things that just seemed to come out of nowhere, but it captured everyone's imaginations. And I think because there's so much interest in fast cars and mechanics and things like that, you wonder how many kids perhaps made their own start in engineering or mechanics based on their experience of Scalextrics when they were very young.
Well, and being in the 60s, I can tell you, everybody, was constantly working on their cars, making them faster. That was the age of the muscle cars and everything. And we couldn't wait to put a bigger carburetor or, glass pack mufflers or different things on there. So I think what started it was the slot cars, and we just kind of developed into the full size later on. So, I'm sure Scalextric did the same thing in your country.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and it's one of those toys I think, along with Subutio, that people remember really fondly. You have people who've kept them from their childhood, or they've perhaps, gone on in later life to revisit it, and they tend to go to places like toy museums and things to get the various different parts. So it remains very popular even now.
Well, and then we get into 60, 62, and we had Ken the year before, and now it's Barbie's Dream House. So there's Barbie at the top of the charts again, and this time it was her dream house. And it's interesting. Now, this is one of those toys where, again, I've mentioned there are certain toys that even today in the year 2024, kids sit on my lap and ask for every single year. And with Barbie, it's always the dream house or the van or the this or the that, all the accessories that Barbie has. But boy, 62, the dream house just took it by storm.
Yeah, it's one of those toys, isn't it? It's probably one of the most immediately recognized toys on the planet when you think about it.
Absolutely. I mean, that's been Mattel's bread and butter for more years than you can count. So, but what was fun is the toy that was on the top of your chart was actually the one that I wanted that Christmas and got. And I had so much fun with that. And that's the Mousetrap game.
That's right, absolutely nothing to do with Agatha Christie plays at all. It was a fantastic board game, probably one of the most infamous board games because it was one of those board games that almost tempts you to lose bits and pieces from it. You would never want to buy one second hand because there's always bits missing. But it was just so cleverly designed. It was a bit like the Heath Robinson plans that you
Yeah.
see.
Yeah.
It was ever so cleverly designed and set up, and kids just, I think their imagination just ran wild with it.
And for those that aren't familiar, imagine, like a domino setup where you knock one down and, just a whole bunch of things happen and they keep going, or people set things up and the ball rolls down, knocks into this, knocks into that, and causes a series of chain events. Well, that was Mousetrap. You had to build the Mousetrap out of the various pieces, like Tom mentioned, until you got to the end. And then I'll tell you, by the time you finally got the end, you didn't want the game to end because once you caught the mouse, it was over. So, but that was one of those fun ones. I had that for years. Boy, I don't even know what I did with it, but boy, it'd be fun to have it again.
Yeah.
So
it was a brilliant game because it was just so imaginative, and I think it laid the groundwork for other board games like Operation, and Buckaroo,
sure.
and all those other ones that took off down the line. It was just so influential.
And I'm really surprised it was top game in the UK and not the US, but we certainly sold enough of them on here. I know that. And then we move into 63, and something else I still get asked for. Easy Bake Oven. Now they've changed it many times. But that first Easy Bake Oven, boy, that was the first home cook special, for kids, and girls just ate that up with a spoon. So no pun intended.
No, I thought it was a brilliant idea because you had this working oven, it had the bulbs in it, so you had the simulation of light and heat, but never too hot that kids had any chance of, hurting themselves. It was just a really nice, gentle toy, which I think it says everything about how continuously popular it has become.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I think that probably, inspired a lot of chefs from today, as they started that young with doing stuff like that. And I think it's a brilliant thing. And for those that love to work at in the kitchen with their parents, that was a great toy. Now, interesting, Barbie wasn't enough. The UK had to come out with their own, didn't they?
They did
For
indeed.
that year.
Yeah, in '63, the Cindy doll was very much in demand. Now, Cindy was a doll that was produced by a company called Pedigree Toys, and it was very much a British version of Barbie. It has to be said, not quite as glamorous as Barbie. If you can imagine Barbie driving around in a kind of open-top limousine in the Hollywood Hills, Cindy was probably making herself a jam sandwich in a caravan somewhere on the Norfolk Broads, So she had a very different way of doing things. She was very much a British icon. Kids loved Cindy. Very, very down to earth.
And by the way, just for my listeners, Cindy is spelled Sindy, not C. And yeah, she was basically the Susie Homemaker of the doll set, where she dressed more casually, dressed down. She had a little less glamour, a little less, posh, but was extraordinarily popular in the UK.
Yeah. Yeah, and continues to be so. I mean, I think people of a certain age always look back fondly on Cindy as being, a very British variation on Barbie, something that was just a little bit different. And they still, I mean, it's just one of those great British toys, I think, that people remember with such affection.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we get into the next year, and then certainly another one of my favorites, especially since it was named after me, G.I. Joe. Boy, I'll tell you, and that put that toy company on the map, I'll tell you what.
Yeah.
And that really pulled them out of the ground and gave them an entirely new life. And that was one of those, the G.I. Joe series just kept blowing up, getting bigger and bigger and more expansive. And you had everything from, Jeeps and trucks and cannons to, all kinds of G.I. Joe soldiers and different things that they were, special, kind of the early special forces, if you will. And boy, that just really exploded that year.
I mean, could Hasbro possibly have imagined just how massive G.I. Joe would become? It's just, again, it's one of those franchises that has just continued to develop and find new fans with kids from, generations down the line.
I'm sure they had a whole lot of people trying to come up. What's the next toy we put in this? What's the next thing that they need? What are they asking for? So, and that was one of those that you could just keep expanding it. And of course, I played soldiers as a boy and stuff. So this kind of fell right into my bailiwick, and I loved it. I used to love playing with G.I. Joe and seeing all the different things at that point. Yep. So, but you guys were off on another icon that year.
That's right. Yeah, the Fab Four. Who would have thought, when you listen to the genius of the Beatles, that you would have George, Paul, John, and Ringo in doll form? But yeah, I must say, to pay the Beatles the highest compliment, they make me feel nostalgic for a period that I never actually lived through. The music is still fabulous today, and you hear so many different influences, from that music. The impact that they had was just amazing. But '64, we were still very much in the epicenter of Beatlemania, and who could ask for more than the Beatles in plastic form?
And that was even before they made it across the pond, or just as they were making it across the pond, I should say. So, I mean, yeah, they were huge in Britain, and they hadn't gotten big in America or were just starting to get big. Interesting sideline. I don't know if you saw this, but Ringo is doing another tour this year.
Oh, I didn't realize that. There you go.
Yeah, he's got another tour going, and he's started it up, and I guess it starts in May of 2024, and he's going to be touring the country. And so he's leaving his LA home, and he's going to be touring the country again. And how old is he now? He's like 80.
He must be in his 80s now, surely.
Yeah, I think he's 80 or 81. I know Paul's 82, but anyway, and he talk about still going. But it was interesting that you look all the way back at 64, and wow,
yeah,
what a difference.
They weren't just popular, we loved them. Yeah.
Well, and then we get into 65, and something that, oh God, I think drove every parent nuts was the Whammo Super Ball. You know, I tell you just dropped the thing and it went wild, and would break more things in people's homes. That was one of those things. It started the whole thing about, okay, take that outside and lose it.
I had no idea of how massive the Whammo company was, when it came to games and toys. But surely the Super Bowl has to be right up there as one of their most popular creations.
Absolutely. Boy, they couldn't keep those in stock either. It's like if you saw one, you grabbed it. So, because everybody wanted one. And of course, as I said, you hit them on the concrete or the sidewalk, and they'd go up, 30, 40 feet, it seemed like, and but a lot of them got lost. So what was funny is you'd buy one, you'd lose it, and you'd tell your parents to go buy you another. So it was one of those things that no wonder it was at the top of the list on 65. They probably sold as many lost balls as they did found ones. So, but you guys had another hero appear on your list.
Yeah, it doesn't get much more British than this, but it was the James Bond Aston Martin car. Now, good old James Bond, he's driven a number of different cars in his time, certainly more than you would realise from the Ian Fleming novels that sparked the adaptations into films. But the Aston Martin, I think, is probably his most iconic. We see it in Goldfinger, and we saw it all the way through the films, even films like The Living Daylights, you see this Aston Martin. I think if any automobile was to be directly associated with James Bond, that would be it.
It was even in Skyfall.
That's right.
It was in the movie Skyfall when he was taking M out to the Skyfall Ranch. So, yeah, that car is iconic no matter how you look at it. And everybody loved that car. That was the first trick car that you really saw. And everybody was like, oh, it's so cool. It's got machine guns. It's got that plate that comes up to protect you. I'll tell you, there's been a lot of great cars from James Bond, but that's still the number one.
Oh yeah, everybody remembers, don't they? All the various different things, including the ejector seat. Let's not forget.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And then we move into 66 and Susie Homemaker. Now here's something that not only was this an iconic toy, but even today we talk about, oh, well, she's like a Susie Homemaker. That's become part of our vernacular, through all the years that this has been around. So, and that was a fun toy too. Or toys, I should say. It was a whole bunch of things that you would do and work at home with your mom. And, again, that was one of those, kind of like the Easy Bake Oven. It allowed mom and daughter to do things together. Not so much the boys, but I'm sure there were some of those as well.
Yeah, as you say, the genius of it was the fact there was a whole range of little miniature appliances that people could build a collection of.
Yeah, absolutely. And and you just went from one thing to the next. Whatever mom was doing, you could do. And that was the genius behind that, and did extraordinarily well here that year. And meanwhile, you guys stole my G.I. Joe.
That's right. That's right.
And then you called him something else.
Yeah, good old Palatoy, who licensed the G.I. Joe figure. And over here, he was known as Action Man. So, again, a bit like Cindy, he was a kind of British variation of an American legend, because Action Man was out there in the Jeep, keeping the country safe, and the way only he could.
And he even had an Aussie version of that as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, you had the Australian, you had the British, so you had, you guys had developed it into a lot of different things that, G.I. Joe wasn't. But yeah, that was kind of fun. Now, how long did Action Man last? Wasn't that long.
The 60s and 70s were probably the heyday, but I mean, it continued for decades after that. I mean, it still
okay.
people still remember with great fondness Action Man, because he was. I think particularly if you grew up in the 70s, people had very fond memories of him, and in particular the one that had the movable eyes. That was that was a particular favourite.
Oh yeah, you were saying that where you could look left or right, and yeah.
So you had a really panoramic view. You could keep an eye out for enemy snipers.
Aha. Okay. Well, and then we move into the 67 and Light Bright. I'll tell you, that was an interesting. It was just a light box with colored pegs, but it challenged kids to really use their imagination and to develop things. And it was kind of like, the color forms of the 60s, and really brought to life in some interesting, fun times. And that was the top U.S. toy that year.
Yeah, I mean, hats off to Hasbro. How many kids would find their creativity stimulated by the Light Bright? And perhaps might discover a whole lot of interest in design and graphics that perhaps they hadn't realised until they played with it.
I'm sure a lot of artists were born from that, that had started on something like that and said, oh, look what I could create, and inspired them to do more. Yeah. And you guys weren't completely out of the loop. You were playing with the Etch-a-Sketch that year, and that was the #1 toy.
Yep, absolutely. The Ohio Art Company were the ones who pioneered the Etch-a-Sketch, and it went down a storm over here. Kids loved it. And I think they enjoyed the fact that, you had this continuous drawing. So there was that little element of challenge that you had to kind of retrace your steps if you were doing something quite complicated like a house with beams and windows and things like that. So, you had to think out your design quite carefully before you really got into it.
Yeah, you had to plan for that. I mean, you couldn't just sit there and turn the knobs and expect something to come out of it. You really had to plan that out, which just absolutely made me crazy. I never developed the skill that well. I think I'd go back to the Light Bright myself. So did you have an Etch-a-Sketch at any time?
I did actually. I did have an Etch-a-Sketch when I was very young, and loved it. It was always good fun.
Yeah, you were probably better at it than me. So I'll tell you, that's what being younger does. And then, of course, back again, 1968, and what's at the top of the heap? Hot Wheels.
Yep, Mattel does it again.
Yeah, boy, I'll tell you, they had a real thing going on with that too. And of course, that was helped by every car that was ever built. I think Hot Wheels came out with a version of it.
That's right. I mean, you can't imagine any car manufacturer not wanting their car license for Hot Wheels, because they'll be played all around the world with young kids.
And even some of the custom cars that were built and that kind of thing, they came out with. I mean, it was just amazing. Kids could have literally hundreds and hundreds of Hot Wheels cars. And of course, they had all the cases and everything to carry them in, which even I had one of those. But yeah, it was amazing. And they're still a hot commodity even today. Yeah. Every year they come out with more of them, or you go into you can go into a grocery store now, and there are cardboard displays around with Hot Wheels cars, and you pick up your kid a Hot Wheel while you're in here.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And how many kids from all different generations did just that? And they had their favourites, they had the ones that they really wanted, and the ones that they would trade. It's been going on for so many years.
Yep, yep. Even beats Pokemon and all the rest as far as trading goes. So, and you guys were playing with wheels too, but not Hot Wheels.
Yeah, absolutely. Good old Fisher Price and Snoopy on wheels.
I never knew they called that Snoopy. I always just thought it was the Fisher Price dog.
Yeah,
But
yeah. I mean, I was a big fan of Charles Schultz and his, Charlie Brown Peanuts
of course,
cartoons.
of course.
So I thought this was great because I mean there was never a dog that was more cool than Snoopy. This was the Red Baron. This was Joe Cool. This was a dog that could launch a literary career from his own kennel. So there's nothing that Snoopy couldn't do.
That's true. And Snoopy certainly did a lot for the Beagle breed. I mean, but yeah, I didn't even know what Snoopy was until that came out. And then I was like, oh, is that what he is? But yeah, I mean, quite honestly, Snoopy's another one that's still around and everybody loves Snoopy.
Yeah,
How could you not? As you said, he's Joe Cool. So,
and I mean that was only a couple of years after the Bill Melendez Christmas special for Charlie Brown's Christmas special.
oh,
And I mean, I think that brought Snoopy into the public mind as never before. So I think that's
absolutely.
nice to see it continued all the way through.
Yep, kids even today are learning all about Charlie Brown, Lucy, Linus, and of course Snoopy. So yeah, and then we closed the decade with this was one I wasn't even familiar with. I had to look this one up, but Flatsy Dolls, Flatsy, for
Yep.
those that don't know what I'm talking about. I didn't either. But I had to look that up, and I'm surprised that was the top selling toy for 69.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it amazed me because I'd never even heard of them before, but this was the Ideal Toy Company. And apparently they had really hit on something that captured people's imaginations because you couldn't find them in 1969. They were so sought after and so popular.
And for those that don't know what we're talking about, it was a doll. It was a flat doll, and it had the wires in the arms and legs, so it was posable. But it was just, a vinyl or plastic doll, and hair on the top, and clothes, very colorful clothes, very colorful hair. But yeah, just something that I wasn't even familiar with until I read it. I was surprised to find out how popular they were. And you can get them on eBay today.
Yeah.
I mean, they're hot. They weren't around a lot of years, but they did very well for the years they were out.
Yeah, I think it's one of those cult classics, isn't it? It's yeah, people remember them. They remember them fondly.
Yeah. And now, of course, they're 10 times the price you would have bought them for in 69, or maybe more than that. But anyway, and meanwhile, in the UK, you were following our lead from the year prior, and you were in the Hot Wheels.
Yep, which just goes to show that a good toy is a good toy no matter where you live. Because Hot
Yep,
Wheels were all over the place in '69, and you think this is the year where we have the first human being walking on the moon,
that's
and
right.
that technology aspect continues over into Hot Wheels, and people being fascinated by the intricate designs.
And one of the things I was thinking about while we were talking is, you look at this list that we are putting out there, and please keep in mind, these were the top toys in those markets for that year. But you got to know, if G.I. Joe was number one, well, Hot Wheels was probably three. And, if the Beatles dolls were a big deal, well, guess what? I'll bet you Barbie wasn't too far behind, or in your case, Cindy. So, we're just talking about the top toy, but there were a lot of second and third place honorees that probably could have made it to number one
Yep.
with a little extra bump. So, And that's what makes it fun, because you think about all the toys that were at the top, and you wonder, well, God, what was second? What was third? And you know what? If our listeners want to learn more, ask us. We'll do the research. Tom is great at research. He loves research. And he has absolutely nothing to do besides the books he's writing, the books he's publishing, and all the other projects that he's into. So he's got plenty of time to research whatever you'd like. And how do they get a hold of you again, Tom?
Well, Joe, if they want to contact us and ask any questions, then the listeners can get on board with traditionally-speaking.com, and they can send us a message about any questions they would like to ask, or indeed if they want to tell us about their own 1960s Christmas experiences.
There you go. So if you have any questions, or tell us what was your favorite growing up, we'd love to hear that, whether it was the 60s or the 70s, or we're going to touch on all of them at some point if we haven't already. So take a good look at our list, and your decade may be there, your favorite decade, and be interested to see what was number one when you were growing up. So, but as always, I love going over this stuff, Tom. And brings back a lot of memories for me, and I know you were too young, rub it in, but at least, you could look at it now and go, wow, you played with those?
Well, thanks so much, Joe, for sharing your experiences today, and it's been great to talk with you about some really iconic toys from the 60s and, of course, beyond. But what's our next subject going to be, folks? Well, there's only one way to find out. Subscribe
Tune in
and join us for the next episode. You never know what the next topic is going to be on Traditionally Speaking.
And don't be afraid to ask us what you would like to hear about, because we might look at that and go, that's a great idea. Let's do that.
Yeah, sure thing. So thanks again, Joe. It's been great to talk with you, and looking forward to catching up with you again soon.
Fun as always, Tom. Take care, and take care, listeners.
Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We'll catch up with you again soon.